All right. So we'll continue with variables. I know that we've tried few things last class, and we'll continue to go on the road. We'll go over some of the rules of creating variable and so forth. But before we even get there, so let's create a new class. Right, and then we need something called method. Why is it giving me a problem now? So what is the very first part? Let's say if I wanted to create a name, right? So very first part, what we have to do, we know that it's a string, right? So string means we have to first specify the data type, right? Followed by, let's say, my name equals to, right? So that's a variable, and then obviously, we can spit out the variable by just using this function or method. So this method kind of gets everything into the console, right? And so forth. And I know like some of the things, like one of the things, you have to be patient with these classes, right? Either you learn it here, you learn it anywhere. Whenever you're learning coding or any type of engineering, right? If you remember physics classes or math class or calculus, you just can't be impatient, because we can only learn through bits and pieces, and then eventually everything's going to make sense, right? So just be patient. When something doesn't work, don't get frustrated and like, oh, I can't learn this, or I'm dumb and this and that. That's not how it works. You have to kind of just fight through it, focus on that specific class, try to get at least 70% of it, so that's kind of what you have to do from your side, right? And then obviously, if you completely don't understand it, you watch the video again, you work on Saturday with Deepak and Asan to get a little bit better understanding. Continue to do homework, even if you're struggling, right? Continue to do the homework, and believe me, within 3, 4, 5 weeks, when we get to Selenium, you're never gonna think about variable. It's gonna come naturally to you. It's like riding a bicycle, right? For the very first time, you worry about every move, or learning how to swim, right? You just worry about every stroke, every little things, right? But once you kind of know this stuff, it's not hard, right? Because what you're learning is fundamentally knowing how to solve problems, right? Even when you go to work, you could have 10 years of experience, and you're going to continue to run into new problems. But what happens is, over the years, you figure out how to solve problems. So you're solving problems. That's why these jobs pays you 6 figures, right? There's a reason for that. It's not just that, oh, you show up and it works. You have to be able to solve problems. These are not like a constant jobs, right? Every day it's a new problem and you have to solve them. So what I'm trying to say is that going forward, every day you're going to struggle in this class, right? You're going to not understand few things, right? You have to fight through it and figure out a way to understand those stuff. But just off lecture, everyone has a different learning curve. So just off lecture, a lot of things may not make sense, and don't try to expect everything to learn. So you go home, watch the videos. You have to dedicate a lot of time to this course next few months, all right? So just be mature about it and kind of go. Don't expect that, oh, you go home and you do nothing and just come into class. That's not how this thing works. All right. Okay. So couple of rules around variables. They're not completely enforced by Java, but this is kind of a coding standard, right? Um, So rules, it cannot be a reserved keyword. So every day you're learning something new. So today is a new vocabulary that we are learning is reserved keyword. So what reserved keyword means is that you see these keywords, well, not the main, sorry, everything that's kind of yellow, right? So you see this yellow, is it yellow or orange? I think it's yellow, right? So this orange, right? These are reserved words. Think of words that Java already took it for themselves, right? So they're like, there's, you can kind of Google it, but again, you don't have to learn all of them. You're gonna run into all of them eventually. But for now, we ran into few, right? We ran into package, public, class, again, public repeated itself again, static, and void. So far you know that you cannot name a variable with any of those value. Make sense? Are you all on the same page? So we can, you see how we name the variable my name? You can name the value void. It's not going to accept it because those words are already reserved for Java. So Java will not allow you to name a variable called void or public, and there's like other 30 of those. Okay? And again, you don't have to remember them. It's going to highlight it in yellow. So even if you wanted to use it, you just can use it. So you have to find another synonyms or whatever. If there is a, if there is a variable name that has to be package, you can name a package, right? So find out some other name that you can use, maybe folder or whatever may be the case, right? So you have to be a little bit creative with your.
Or we can say like school package.
Yeah. So like again, it does as long as it's not packaged, right? I'm okay with, but it has to make sense to what you're trying to do. So that's the first thing. We cannot use reserved keyword. Also, the name should be meaningful, right? What does that mean? So, if you have a variable that represents name, then it should say name, right? We know that this variable represents some sort of name, right? If we, let's say, and when I was in school, like, and the programming classes were just like, oh, x greater than y, it doesn't represent a lot of things, right? So I try to think like, let's say if we were to name this x, now it doesn't, I don't know what x represents. X can represent anything, right? So make sure that your variable names are meaningful as well. So when another developer reads this, they know what that means, right? Because I could come from a retail background of engineer that working on finance. So I may not know anything about finance. So, I have to pretty much learn through code base, right? So that's kind of what my Bible is. So if you don't write this nice way, clean way, then it's just going to continue to create more problems in your code base. So make sure, like, start getting into the habit of writing clean code. So one of the things writing clean code is writing appropriate, meaningful variable names, okay, along with obviously class names. You see how we name the class name variables? Because that's what we're going to talk about today, right? That's what I named variable is. All right, so those are the two things. Variable name cannot start with number. So we cannot start a variable name with like any type of values like this, okay? So it always has to start with characters. You can have it in between, it won't complain it, but there has to be some reason why you're putting your numbers into a variable name, all right? All right. Cannot contain a space or hyphen, so you cannot have like something like this, right? And then I guess it's also not going to allow you to have hyphen. You can have an underscore if you need to space it out for whatever reason, and we'll see a reason where we need to have a variable with underscore. When we get there, we'll talk about it. All right. For now, you cannot have a hyphen or a space between your variable name. Right. So these are rules that. What's up?
Have plus
Sorry.
sign.
Plus sign. We try it out. No, these are like kind of like a special characters because plus is an addition, right? So now it's thinking it's going to complain about those kind of stuff. So try to stay with alphabetical. That's the core thing, right? But also, I mean, what is the reason, right? Just because to have it, do you have it? I mean, Java thought about a lot of problems that again, it's a strict language, right? If you were in JavaScript, may allow you to do a lot of stuff because it's little loose languages, right? This is a very strict language, so it's going to enforce you a lot of good practices by default. So you may get annoyed, but it's for your. It's kind of like your own good. It's like your parents, right? And your baby, they know what's best for you. So Java, that's why it's a really good language to start with when you're learning how to code, because it will force you to do best, the best practices that's out there. I don't like it a lot of time, believe me, but this is kind of a good standard. When you do Python or JavaScript, it's a little bit loose. It lets you do a lot of different things, things just works, but when it doesn't work, it's a big problem to solve it. Um, and also, variables are case sensitive. Well, all the languages are case sensitive. So any languages, the uppercase name. So let's say if we had two variable, and please don't do this, right? Just to kind of make it work. So I have two variables. You see how it's complaining, saying, hey, within this scope, you have another variable called name, right? So if I call name, let's say this function call name, it doesn't know which one it's calling. So you can't have a duplicate variable name. There may be cases we can have duplicate, and I'll explain it that when we get there. But in this case, we can have a duplicate variable name. It doesn't make sense. So what do we have to do? Some in the past. So let's say if you put this in uppercase, it will take it, right? But you shouldn't be doing that, right? Because uppercase, in this case, this is two different variable names here. Even though they're both called name, but under the hood, uppercase and lowercase means totally different thing in software computing, okay? So make sure, don't bypass by doing one uppercase. And also, you shouldn't be writing in variable name with all uppercase anyway, right? Because it goes back to here called camel case. All your variable name should be camel case, same as your package names, right? So what camel case is, it starts with lowercase, your first word, so I'll get rid of this. Your first word starts with lowercase, so let's say my would be the first word, and any new word after that, first letter would be uppercase, right? So that's kind of what camel case looks like. Make sense?
Does it have to be like this?
Yes. Okay. Now Java is not going to complain it if you don't do that, but that's a bad practice, right? This is the Java standard. So a lot of things Java is not going to complain. It's just from a programming experience. This is kind of the practices that's out there. Okay. Like no matter what you do, you have to have some method of doing things, right? And at some point, someone decided to go with this, right? So we're gonna have to follow that, right? Because most of the code base would have this written that way. All right, so these are high level. These are the rules. I may miss one or two. That's fine. If your Java doesn't allow you to do it, you can do it anyway. You're probably gonna come to me or Deepak, and we can work it out, or you can Google it out, right? But high level, if you kind of follow those. Now, I don't want to see those on your code now. Since we went over this, be cautious when you're writing a variable name. First, ask, if is this a reserved keyword? If it's a reserved keyword, Java will help you to throw that error, right? The ones just Java is going to help you, I'm not too worried about that because you can move forward without fixing it. But the ones that I'm more worried about is this one. People write horrible variable names, right? Try to be like a little bit, like don't force yourself, don't rush through these things, right? You rather, like, if I give you 3 assignments, you rather do 2 of those like really well instead of like, kind of just rushing through and try to finish everything. It doesn't add a lot of value to yourself, right? So, even if you're a little slow, I'm okay with that, as long as you're completing the task the correct way. I assigned you 3 homework and you only did 1, but that 1 was really good. That's okay, right? Maybe you're kind of going in a little slower pace, but now don't go home and then just do 1, right? That's not also helping you. So you have to continue to do more practice. But this is the one, spend a little time, and you're gonna have enough chances, maybe today's classwork and homework, to really do that, right? And like I said, case sensitive. So make sure they are following camel case approach. All right. Okay. So that's
Case sensitive and the camel case same thing.
no. Case sensitive means, when we mentioned uppercase name, like uppercase N is different than lowercase n. Okay. So they both means 2 ASCIIs, right? And we can talk about ASCIIs later. But think of like the computer doesn't care if it's computer doesn't know if it's n, right? That's not how computer understand these things, right? So uppercase n computer means it's something else, whereas lowercase n is totally different things. Okay.
So what is the reserved keyword?
We talked, I think you came a little late,
Yeah.
right? So reserved keywords are the keywords that are taken by Java already, so you can use them as your variable name. All right. So that's what happens when you come late. You make me repeat it. All right. So try to get here on time. Any questions? All right.
I have one question. So isn't the Pascal case should be a rule or like for the
Pascal case is also another rule. I'm not too worried about that right now because we didn't go into creating objects yet. When I get there, we'll talk about Pascal case, right? But for now, we'll talk about camel case. But Pascal case is nothing different. If when you have a class name and if it's 2 words, right? A word starts with an uppercase, and every new word would be an uppercase, right? That's the only difference, right? So class's name should be Pascal case, and variable name should be, and variable and method shape name should be camel case, right? So even those little terms are important for you to learn, right? So we already learned like 4 or 5 definitions already. So make sure, when you communicate with me or Deepak, try to use those vocabulary to explain it. It's only going to get better your, technical communications. All right, I'm going to remove this. And talk about something called constants. So constants are block scope, much like variables, defined using the data types and variable names. We'll talk about data types just after this, right? The value of constant cannot change through assignments, and it cannot be redeclared, right? So now I regret I removed that. I have to rewrite it. So let's say int age equals 32, right? And then I can reassign this value, right? So let's say I do age, right? And then I run this code base. I'm expected to see 32, right? So let's say I reach my birthday, and then we add, age becomes 33, right? And I print this code. Age is 33. So I was able to reassign value to an existing variable, right? Because as every time I reach my birthday, I want this variable to increment by 1, right? We'll learn how to do that later, but for now, what you really need to take away from this, well, Mohammed created a variable here, and he updated the variable here. So I was able to update or reassign values to an existing variable, okay? When it comes to constants, you can reassign them. It is what it is. This is what you're gonna have to deal with, right? You could do something like this. I mean, I have to give this example, but let's say death age, right? that should be constant, right? Because that cannot be changed. That's the year, that's your final age, right? You're not incrementing any more age. So these are kind of what constant means. Something that cannot be changed. And non-constant, the ones we've been working with, right, is sort of the values that we can change. So let's do a constant one. Let's do another example of regular one, and then we'll do a constant one. So int account balance equals to $100, right? So account balance always kind of fluctuates, right? So this is something cannot be constant. I can withdraw, I can deposit, I can withdraw, I can deposit, right? So we'll set account balance equals to whatever my account balance, which is 100, and I'll do plus 200, right? And then we'll do south account balance, right? And then we'll do a print, and I should see 300, right? So that's fine. So what I'm doing simply here is that I'm updating my account balance. So on the right side, I took whatever the account balance is. Let's say I don't know that. I mean, in this case, you can see this, but in real world, you're not going to see this value, right? It's going to come from a database. So you'll have the account balance, and I'm adding the new deposit that the user entered, which is another 200. So I'm adding those two values, and I'm updating the existing account balance. And now when I print it, I get a 300, right? So what you want to take away from this here is that, again, I was able to reassign a value to an existing variable. Make sense? Okay. Now what we have to do is, but if you do this, final int a routing number equals to, so as soon as you put a final before your data type, right, that means I can use this value whenever I want it, but I cannot reassign it. So the reason I choose routing number is something that doesn't change.
This is about you, Mohammed.
That was Siri weirdo. So constant means final. You can use a final keyword. That means you cannot reassign this value. And when you try to reassign it, and I'll show you the benefit of Java right now, right? Routing number is going to complain. Now, if you were to use JavaScript, it will not complain until you run the code, right? So this is very strict, like I said. It tries to understand before you even run it, right? So two things. Don't worry about all those calculations. I mean, it's a very simple calculation, but don't worry about that. We're going to learn how to do all of that. What I want you to learn, take away from last 10 minutes, what I'm saying, regular variable can be reassigned and updated with a new value, right? Constant variables, right, cannot be reassigned. Once you set the value, you have to live with that. Now, you have to make a decision. Does my variable ever going to change? If answer is no, make it final, right? Hey, I don't want you to change that. If your answer is yes, it's going to change, then make it regular. So this is what decision making comes. As a good programmer, you have to make those decisions, right? Like a model number of a car. If you're working for a car company, like model number is something constant, right? We don't change that at all for a specific devices. So these are the things that you have to make a decision as a developer, right? And it's going to be different for all of you guys. Depending on the company you work for, constant value and regular values are going to be different. So make sure it's just not like apple to apple. So it's just about making the right decision at that point, asking those questions, and not just coding all the time.
How to mark as a constant? Only like final?
Yes.
Okay.
See the difference between this and this, we have a final before that.
So it's really constant.
It will know. So see, now you already know. So other programmer will know. You don't have to put a comment, right? So just by reading this, someone knows, oh, routing number, this is something that doesn't change, right? Automatically understands. So this is, if you're a Java developer, you know what a final means, right? So you're starting to become that. So two things you kind of learn now is that, well, you've learned what the rule behind creating variable, And then you also learn the difference between regular variable and a constant variable.
Question: when you reassign the variable when it's not final, you don't have to put int in front of it?
No, because I already defined it, right? If you put an int, that's an excellent question. If you put an int, that's like you're creating a new variable. Does that make sense? You're not assigning it because I already know this is an account balance. Why do I have to keep doing that again? So now compiler or Java understands, oh, he's trying to create another variable called account balance, and I'm going to throw an error because I already have one called account balance. So that's a good question, but yeah, when you're reassigning it, you don't do that. Okay, so we're going to take next 20 minutes to do our quiz. I didn't forget about it because I spent time on it. That's the quickest entrance you make to this platform. It's like you know the number.
It's got a copy 6 digits. How hard is it?
Oh.
Is it in Slack or
And it also gives you like a weird star next to your name saying first.
Do I get extra
you,
points
you
for
get a
that?
badge. You get a badge. Well, this is the extra point.
Oh, right.
So my son, right? He's been in math like every day. He beat everybody. Like the other day he lost. But he didn't get the medal. Like, there's like one medal that they share. He's been having that since the day one. So somebody else did beat him and tried. Well, also except losing. That's so. It was yeah. It was it was kind of very interesting. Yeah, I told him you lose more than you win. That's pretty much how it works.
At first it was we just on the line. My daughter went to find
Oh, that's
maybe other people will find it.
yeah. I think it's so important to fail early.
You can't stop it.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter had a
So that's why you have to start and I believe. Yeah. And then once they get in. Like what?
yeah. I thought it was your charges, and then I thought it was going to be for a second, third, be a winner. Everybody has to
You got pissed. Yeah. We need to stop that.
like everybody keep getting participation. You still should be for a second.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys, everyone here logged in? Everyone online logged in? All right. It's where some people are absent today. And also, please just use your real name here. It's hard for me to update the grades when you just put numbers or something. All right, let's start. If you please mute your speaker, it gives you that creepy. Today's percentage you get 76. The questions, maybe the question didn't make sense. Okay. And you guys really prepared, or it was just really easy. If most of you done. Uh, Deepak, did Andre start? Can you can you check with him? Andre, are you taking the quiz? Does everyone finish here? Anyone still taking? Oh. Done? How about online? Anyone done? Okay. So yeah, I mean, you just kind of review the question you missed and take it from there. It's pretty straightforward. All right, let's move on to the next topic. So in Java, there's two main data types, right? So you can think of primitive data types and non-primitive data types. In primitive data types, which we've seen already, like int, non-primitive data types that we've seen already called string. Okay, there's a kind of the two examples, very common example that everyone kind of starts with. Within the primitive data types, there are it branches out to two more different data types. I mean, you can kind of break them into numeric, kind of deals with only numbers. Okay, and then you have two which are non-numeric. Make sense? So you have the parent data types are primitive and non-primitive. That's kind of what Java has. And then within primitive, you have numeric and non-numeric. Within numeric, you have integers and floating points. So integers are whole numbers, right? They don't contain any decimals. Floating points has decimals. So these two types has decimals. Again, don't try to memorize all of that, right? That's not the point here. Just to understand, you're gonna have the graph again. You're gonna have the video, so you can review it, right? I believe all this learning is through experience, right? You work on it, you practice on it, it will come naturally to you. And then you have integers. We have byte, short, int, long. So these four types only deals with whole numbers, right? So you might be asking, why do we have four types? And we'll go through that in a little bit, right? And then floating point, who has two data types, double and float. And then we have the non-numeric, deals with characters and Boolean. Like I said, definitions we'll go through in a little bit. Anything that is not those data types are pretty much non-primitive, right? So string could be a non-primitive, arrays are non-primitive, user-defined classes are non-primitive. Let's say we're building a software for this room, We have TV could be a non-primitive, right? We have tables that are non-primitive. We have students that are non-primitive. So what I'm trying to give you an example is anything that are not primitive are pretty much non-primitive. In another word, we call them reference data type, right? So non-primitive, there's another name for it. It's called reference data type. It has to have some sort of reference. And these come from the Java language itself. That's how Java language started, with those, right? And then people kept building libraries after, and those are pretty much what your reference data types are, right? So this data type, primitive data type, kind of built in from the language itself, right? And non-primitive is an extension sort of the language, right? It uses Java API to add more libraries. So as Java continues to grow, you're going to have more primitive data, not more reference data type. So this raises the question: what type of data type is Selenium?
Non-primitive.
Non-primitive, because it's something someone created for us, right? They don't come from the language itself. So let's go over some of the ones. So let's first start with byte, right? So the byte data type is an 8-bit sign to, it doesn't matter, right? So what byte means, and then we can kind of start do with this one. You can think of byte is the smallest, the tiniest data type that a Java has. It can only store down to -128 and up to 127. Can anyone guess why is 127 and not 128? Yes, good. In coding, 0 counts as numbers, right? So we start a count. Every count starts from 0. So 0 is technically your 1, right? So 0, just take that into account. So that's why we have, so the lowest value, the smallest value that you can kind of store into a byte data type would be -128, right? So, and then the highest would be 127. Then you have short. Short is another data type. It can store as small as -32,768 and the positive 32,767. That's the highest value it can take. So just to give you a visual of what that size means, like byte. I mean, we all, buy computers with X amount of memories and space, right? That's pretty much what it is, right? When you create a variable, how much space do you want this variable to take from your computer memory? Does that make sense? So
When application started, yeah.
yes. So if you decide one of those big ones, which is nothing, believe me, compared to what we have in processing power, you don't have to think about that too much, right? We're probably not going to use byte short at all. We're probably most likely going to use int. It's just convenient. But just to give you an idea, and for your homework, you have to make a decision which data type you have to use for a specific homework test that I give you. So, for example, we can create a real life example here. So let's think of byte, right? So this is, let's assume, when you created a byte data type, right, with age, this is how much space byte takes from your computer. This is how much space that a short takes from your computer. So you have to understand how big my variable can go. Like you think of like dog's age, right? Can dog live up to 128 years? We have not seen that yet, right? So you are safe to store, you hope so, right? I don't want to upset anyone. So but coming from a statistic background, that's kind of how you make decisions. So you're safe to kind of store that value with byte. So you can store it here, but you're probably only using a very little space. It's like living in a mansion, right, with 4 people. So you're only using this much, and this all empty space is being just it's just like a waste, right? So
And application works slowly.
you're not gonna see the slowness. Like we are in such a day and age with data. I mean, we are storing. Come on, guys. Look at Facebook comments and videos and images and Snapchat. Like we are good with those things, but it's called conscious. Like you want to the slowness, you just can't catch it. It's at this that's how fast these things are, right? But in bigger scheme of things, yes. If you don't need that much space, why you use it? That's the question I want to kind of raise here.
We, human calls luxury. Even
No, it's called irresponsible programming. So what I want to kind of think is like as a coder, now you have to start making decisions. When I give you this classwork or homework, and as soon as you come across a variable, ask yourself, first of all, what kind of data type should I use? Primitive or non-primitive? If you go with step by step, you're going to be a better programmer. Once you say, okay, no, this is non-primitive. Well, within non-primitive, what type? Is it numeric or non-numeric? So if it's numeric, okay, within numeric, is it an int? Is it a byte? Is it a short? Right? And then you ask, is this variable value ever going to go past 128? Right? If the answer is yes, then you go into short, right? If then you say, is short value is going to go above 32,000? If the answer is yes, then choose an int, right? So that's how you start to make decisions, and it's really fun. Like I promise you, like if you like programming, you're gonna enjoy this. Like if you like solving problems, playing video games, this is the class that you want to be at, because you have to break things into pieces. But to give you that understanding of space and memory, this is what it is. So if your variable never going to reach 32,000 and you choose a short, you're just wasting a lot of space, right? So when it comes to int, that's much bigger, right? And now you store your age into an int, which let's assume this much value. So you wasted all of that space. Now Java is not going to exhaust or like spit out the not unused space. Java's thinking someday your value may reach into 2 billion something, because that's what int stores, right? So you may, I mean, we haven't figured that out either, where a human can reach up to 2 billion, right? So, but if that happens, because Java, again, computer only understand what you tell them, right? So you told them like, hey, I want to allocate that much space because my variable may reach there one day. Does that make sense? So that's your int data type. So if we go back to int, and there's some explanation, you can kind of go over it when you're home. So that's your int. The lowest is negative 2 billion. Yeah, so 2,147,483,648. Don't worry about the number. If you're putting int, chances are things are gonna work for you, unless we run into US debts or something like that, right? Then billion doesn't work for you. So that's kind of what you're dealing with here, int value. And then you have long. So 32-bit, long is double of int, right? So that's massive. That's 2 to the 63rd power, right? So that's like, I don't know, 922, some crazy number, right? So you say 2 times 63 times, right? So whatever that value is, so you can be safe to use long, whatever, if you need to exceed that. But I recommend not to use long unless you really, because you are allocating a lot of space here. Like I said, most of the time we're probably just going to deal with int because it's just easier to write, right? You kind of get used to writing int.
If you work like financial business,
Mhm.
you must be need too long, yeah. Because you don't
Again,
know-
it depends. I don't want to go into a specific domain, right? You have to ask yourself, is my value going to exceed 2,147,000,000, whatever that value is? If it's going to exceed that, then you want to use long. Even you can have a value that exceeds long. How do you solve that, right? We have other solutions for that. We're not going to talk about that today, right? But long, you can be safe. The long will cover most of your problems, right? Int will cover most of your problems. But these 4 deals with whole number, right? So let's do those, and then we'll come back here. and so we can say byte dog age equals to 12, right? And then short, so something that represents, right? So then short maybe my age, you know. I don't want to leave past 128, but that's fine. So let's say, 100. So I'm expecting to maybe go above 128, so under 32,000, right? So that's kind of how you want to deal with int. I don't know, bank balance would be nice, right? And then you can store some numbers big like this, right? And then the other one is long, right? Equals to distance between Earth and Mars. So that exceeds 2 billion, right? So is it 2 billion? No, 2 billion. Anyhow, so let's assume this may exceed, and then one thing is you have to add L end of it. So tell the compiler, hey, this is a long variable, right? So for long, you have to add L after it. But
If we don't put the L, it just makes it wrong, yeah?
it may, the compiler might be smart enough to catch it, but with the standard, we have to put an L, all right? So
Can you say again? No?
you see the L keyword the letter I added?
Yeah.
So if you're declaring a long variable, at the end of your value, I want it last value should be L.
It must
Okay.
be capital.
Yes, must be capital. All right. So again, that's the smallest byte, then the short, then the int, then the long. But you have to make a decision, right? Which one do I use for my variable, right? So that's what it is. Okay. But this dealing with integer values, they're dealing with whole numbers. What if you have to have something average of something, right? Then things are different a little bit. So we need to deal with decimal points. If you want to deal with decimal points, it's not going to allow you to do that, right? It's just going to start throwing, and it's kind of suggesting you, hey, you can use a byte here, but I suggest you use double here, right? But decimal points, we have two types. We have the float, which is the 32 bits, and then 64 bits is the double. So if your decimal points is not going to exceed, let's say, this value again, right? You can start using that. If your double is not, if double exceeds that, then we can figure something out, right? But for now, you can use floating and doubles. So if you need to deal with the decimals, like you're calculating something and you have to find average of something, so that can lead to some sort of decimal values, right? So you'll see something like this. Float, I don't know. Equals to, I don't know, 44.88, right? And even for float, at the end of your value, you have to label it as lowercase f, right? So tell the compiler, hey, this is a float. Oh, this is the Java standard. That's how Java wants us to declare float. That's how Java wants us to declare long, all right? So there are some rules. You just can't go away from that, right? So try to stick with those standards.
But F is not capital.
No, we talked about this, right? If it's capital, right? Everything is case sensitive. So if I put capital, there's a reason for that.
No, I'm saying like, so float is not.
Right. So this is lowercase, right? So Java rules that lowercase f we use here, not uppercase. Again, case sensitive. So if we use lowercase f, that means that's kind of the rule, right? If we make a mistake here, it might throw an error for us. And then we have double, which is the big, we're pretty much going to use double for every, right? Double for everything. So your average equals to 77.88. Well, good thing with double, you don't have to use app. So you can pretty much scratch off those two. We're probably not going to use them, right? We're probably not going to use these two. These are your favorite. If you're going dealing with decimal, so we're going to break it down. We don't want to go crazy with all of them, right? But for homework, I want you to identify them. But that's the only time. Going forward, we'll deal with int, and we're going to deal with double. If it's decimal, it's going to be double. If it's a whole number, we're going to do int. Make sense? All right. Then two more that I want to go over, and then we'll do some classwork. Then we have, wait, what are those? Oh, these are, we have Boolean, right? So Boolean is the smallest data types that the entire language has. It's 1 bit, right? But it only stores 2 values. It can only have 2 values. By default, it will be set to false, right? It only keeps 2 values, either true or false. So
Default is false. Yeah.
yes, default is false, right? So this right here. So Boolean would be something like this. Boolean is human, let's say. God damn it. So these keyboards are a little flat. So I'm used to using that one. Yeah. So you see how Boolean, I'm asking, is the object human? It's telling me either true or false. Right? And it can only store 2 values in here. Right? You can't store anything else. And get used to Boolean because you're going to use on everything. Because all those logics that we are going to write, is this door open or closed? If it's open, let student in, right? So we're going to write all of those logics, right? Is this seat occupied or not? If it's not, let her sit here, right? So these are the kind of decision making. Every decision making that you do from the moment you wake up till you sleep, you're making Boolean decision over and over, right? Is train arrived? If it's yes, go in. If not, don't do it, right? So these are like our mind kind of continue to make Boolean decisions. So we're kind of extending our ability with coding, right? So in this case, we are going to be writing a lot of logic, and it's going to return us true or false, right? And based on that true or false, I'm going to do more things. Based on that, you're going to continue to do more things. So it goes into the whole nest, right? So Boolean is a very commonly used. So I want you to understand that one as well, right? And usually Boolean starts with, I mean, this is not a standard, right? It's kind of like programming standard for years we have tried, is that we try to put is front of it. Because you're asking kind of a question, right? Is this exist or not, right? Think of like, you want to click on a button, which eventually we're going to do that, right? In Selenium. So is submit button displayed or not? If it's displayed, then only click on it. You don't want to click on something that's not there, right? Or you can say, is this button enabled or not? If it's only enabled, then you'll perform the action click. So that's kind of how you're asking a question to the application or to another object. Hey, what am I looking for here? Is this that or is this, right? So Boolean is that, and it can only store true or false. And we'll have a quiz to kind of refresh your brain a little bit once maybe next class or after.
After the Boolean, coming to return, yeah?
Sorry?
When we have code Boolean,
Mm-hmm.
next one must be return.
So we're not there yet. So I'm not talking about return just yet.
Okay.
Well, let's stick to only the variable values. So variable values, return, we have a long time to go. We're going to talk about it in like 2 weeks. So right now, Boolean can only store true or false. That's what we want to stick to. Like I know some of you guys have taken class somewhere else, we got to go with my pace a little bit, right? So that way we can all go into same direction. And even if you've taken some classes, this could be a refresher for you, all right? Don't worry, everyone's gonna be challenged enough. I promise you that. There's gonna be a point you're gonna write bad reviews about me. So, because it's not an easy, and Zahir knows that a little bit. So it's you will be challenged. I promise you. Right now is the nice days. All right.
Actually, the rule maybe in Java is different. In JavaScript, I've seen that Boolean also contains greater.
Yeah, we'll go there. We'll get there, right? First day in Java today. We'll go to all of that. We will not skip anything, I promise you. And then the last one, which is, you can call it car or char. I don't know what that pronunciation of that, okay? So this is a debate that's going on for some time. But we'll go with car, right? So it stores a single character. A single character. If you need to deal with a single character, you don't want to get a string. A string stores a lot of memory on your, right? So if you have, like, let's say, car, first name, initial. So if you know you're dealing with the first name initial, right? Let's just store, but single quote, not double quote. As soon as you make a double quote, now the compiler wants the data type to be string. But if it's a single quote, so my first name initial is M, I can use that, right? So that way, we can also do this, car, grade, score. So let's say you're getting grade from your school, and it could be A, B. So you might say, well, Mohammed, you could have done this, string grade score equals to, again, whenever we deal with string, it has to be a double quote, right? And you can say A. But now you're allocating a lot more space on your memory because the string reference data types are huge, right? We don't want to, I'm not sure what that size of that is. The more as soon as you allocate that, now you allocated a big space, but you're only using tiny bits of it, right? So ask yourself, is this going to be a full string at some point? If it is, then you might not want to use a car, right? But if it's not, if it's always going to stay into a single letter, then you want to use car, all right? So these are your 8 primitive data types. Does that make sense? So please prepare for them. And let's take a quick break. When you come back at 8:20, we're going to do some classwork that Deepak has prepared for us. Once you're kind of done with the classwork, maybe we can share and try to do it together after that. All right? So just a few more vocabularies and understanding, and then we'll get to the classwork. So we have, so in programming, there's 2 types of languages. Actually, there's more, but these are the 2 pretty much been heavily used. A lot of people define static typing and dynamic typing with respect to the point at which the variable type are checked. Using this analogy, static type languages are those in which type checking is done at a compile time, right? So there's a layer. When it comes to Java, as soon as we save it, as soon as we type it, whenever we save it, it compiles it first, and compiles it into what type of code? Remember the diagram? It's good memory. All right, so we have the bytecode, right? So before we go there, we were telling you, before we get to machine code, I want to kind of find the bug before that, so to speak, right? So these IDEs are pretty good to detect those. So as soon as it compiles into bytecode, it's telling you during the compile time, it's going to give you the error saying, hey, you can't do that. And then the languages that does that is Java, C++, C#, Objective-C, right? These are kind of the languages that does that. And then you have languages such as dynamic type languages are like JavaScript, Python, Swift, right? So these these languages, you don't really get the error, right? You can only get the error when you run it, because that's the only way it hits the error. So if I were to write this JavaScript in here, and just to kind of give you an example, so I mean it's not going to compile because it doesn't understand. So that's the JavaScript code. It will not throw or anything into. So let's say I want to print what type this is. So obviously these keywords are not gonna work because it's not JavaScript type of language, right? So when you do this, even if you have some error here, it's not going to log it. So let's say I remove this, it will still be okay when you're typing it. It's not going to complain it. It is that you have some sort of checks there, but at the same time, that's how JavaScript works or Python works and whatnot, right? But then when it comes to Java, which is pretty cool, so so this is a dynamic language, right? So they're only found error when it hits it. With Java, your entire project has to be error free, right? With JavaScript and Python, it doesn't have to be, right? If the code base doesn't hit the error, you'll be all right. It's not going to throw anything. It will still let you work, right? But in Java or C++, you have to fix all your errors, and we've seen the Java code already, so that's kind of will be like string name and then equals to Mohammed. And you see the difference, like here, we didn't have to specify a data type, right? As soon as you specify this keyword in JavaScript, you can pretty much, it automatically tries to figure out for you. So that's one thing to take away from this. And you see how I didn't put the semicolon and it's throwing an error here. You don't get that stuff with other languages. But anyhow, so that's kind of what it is. You have the static languages, the ones that I mentioned, Java, which we are learning a static language. So it's going to be a little bit more strict, a little bit more annoying. But then when it comes to JavaScript or Python, if you do that at some point, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to learn as well because you learned it the harder way, so to speak, right? So once you learn Java, I just don't see how you not learn dynamic languages. It's just going to be much easier, and I promise you that, right? And it's not to teach. Like, in fact, Java is not my favorite language or anything like that, right? But at the same time, it's a good language to learn.
But you work on Java because
I don't work on Java now anymore, right? But I worked in Java for years, so that's that.
What's your favorite?
I don't have a favorite language. I like Python a lot. Like, it's just because where the industry is kind of heading. So I mean, industries like next, not I mean just yet, like AI and machine learning, and all of the scientists they use Python. So a lot of the libraries, it's not because Python is something that I want to use, right? But a lot of the libraries that they're building out with all this crazy algorithm, they're in Python initially. But then someone will transfer that into JavaScript and Java and so forth. But initially, because the scientist community uses Python, and that community is also very mature, so not a lot of new people coming into Python, as a first language. So, and it's a bit hard to do even Selenium and stuff with Python because there's not a lot of information out there. So you have to read a lot of documentations and things like that to figure out. One of the company, I had to build a framework in. Actually, this is the company, right? It's a Canary. So when I was building their framework, we had to do in Python because their entire platform is Python. But it was really hard. It's not because the coding is not a lot of reference, so you have to write a lot of custom stuff. But when it comes to Java and Selenium, I don't see a problem that you run into and someone didn't solve it, right? Because there's so many people using it. Same thing with like even if you were to work JavaScript, you'll get more thing. But Python is definitely one of the good languages. So this is the difference between static versus dynamic, right? So if someone were to ask you what kind of language Java is, it's a static compile-time language, and then you have dynamic languages that are JavaScript and Python. All right, so that's that. Let's go over the whole classwork. We have 8:32. I mean, I hope you finish by. I don't think it should take you half an hour, but I want to see how do you take my instruction, right? So I say your variable name should be meaningful. Your data type should be thoughtful, right? You should think about what data type should you use for that specific thing. And then the spacing and all of those different things, like just want to see how clean your code looks. You can, a lot of people can solve problems, but is it kind of enterprise level? Is it professional, right? I can play basketball, but can I play professionally? Maybe not, right? So I want you guys to kind of start building the habit of professionalism, right? Otherwise, you'll push your code. If you don't start the habit from today, you're not gonna do it 2 months later. You're not going to do it 2 years later. So you're kind of gonna stick with the bad habits, and your career is not going to grow. Okay? So pretend like this is you're investing time right now for your career, and just take those advice a little bit. Okay. So this is what I want you to do, and I shared it in Slack, so you should have it anyway. But let me copy this here. And another way you can do comments is if you do double star, so you can add block of comments at once, right? So instead of doing single black backslashes, this is like a single line comments, and then if you want to do multiple line of comments, you can do that. All right. Store the below scenarios in appropriate data type, and print those values to console using system out println, right? So first you create the variable, then the subsequent line should have a system out println, and then print that value out, right? I want you to figure out a variable name to do this one. Highest number of goals scored in a football match. So maybe Google it out. Like what was in a professional? Don't go local, right? So then that can exceed 32,000. So make sure just Google out, or if you don't know the answer to it, just Google out. Your age, right? Total number of employees in a company. So just choose any company, right? And then store that value. Population of USA, right? Mortgage interest rate of today. Current balance in the bank account. It could be your bank account. Are you allowed to watch PG-13 movies, right? So I want to see how you name that, right? And then initial of your last name. Think this could be a valid requirement actually, right? So this could be a valid requirement where you have to build an application around that, right? So couple of things before you start. Again, find a meaningful name for your variable and find a thoughtful data type that would represent that variable. Okay. Any questions before we get started?
How do you do this comments? The multiple comments.
Oh, if that's the question, that's easy, right? So we'll just do this / and then space and 2 stars, and then you do hit a space. Okay. Anyone from online have any questions?
Can we just have that table?
That
on the screen. Yeah, that helps.
this thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have questions from online? It's not group work. It's an individual work. I want you to individually try this out. Okay? Okay. Unfortunately, last 30 minutes we didn't record it. I didn't click the button over here. So that's fine. You remember it. So always when we come back from break, just maybe remind me a little bit every now and then.
Because scanner is equal to new scanner, right?
Yeah.
So for scanner, that's the result people.
Yeah.
And the second scanner you can take.
No, this is not a reserved keyword because this doesn't come from the Java language. This comes from the Java API. So I could create another object called scanner, and it will differentiate it. You see how scanner is coming? It will tell you it's coming from a Java util. In our case, it would come from Java demo basics. So only keywords are reserved if they're highlighted. Yeah. Okay. Reference data types are not usually reserved. Okay. So that's that. All right, let's go into more interesting stuff.
Is it recording now?
It's recording now. Obviously, I figured out.
I didn't see the counting. That's why.
But okay, I'm just gonna put it here so it's recorded. Let's go into something more interesting. We're going to learn a lot about strings because we do a lot of manipulation around strings, right? Well, let's create some more space here. So a string is another data types. I mean, this is another reference data type, right? And a string can be any text inside of a double quote. We already been using string a lot for our name, for our address, for other bunch of stuff, right? So string car name equals to Volvo XC60. So that's how you kind of define it. String indexes are 0 based. The first character is in a position 0, and then the second is in 1, and so on. Again, everything starts to count from what? 0. So whatever count you want is always whatever the length is minus 1. Okay, so that's we have to take that into account. So let's start doing some manipulations. First, we need the main method, so otherwise our code won't execute. We'll set string first name equals to alright. So if you wanted to combine them, combine strings. How do we combine strings? So let's say I want to create another variable called full name, right? Full name will require me to combine them. And so I can say what? First name, right? But then that's the problem, right? That becomes like there's no space, right? So what if I wanted to divide them again? So if I wanted to divide them back to maybe there's a other company that consumes our applications, and they need to we are just giving them the full name, but they need to divide it back to first name and last name. So when you put them together, right? So let's say check this out. So now the first name and last name becomes like a one name, which is a full name, but that's not what maybe we wanted to do, right? If you give that to your product manager, like, what the hell is this? So we're going to be adding some space. Okay. And then we'll say, right? So that creates, and you will see the benefit of this, right? So if someone were to take this full name and break it down again to first name, last name, they can look for a space, and that's when they can kind of break that branch. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what the advantage of that. All right, let's do another one. And you might say, like, where am I getting all this stuff? There's documentation for all these things. The next one is find the land of a there are a lot of cases you need to find what length the string is. Let's say if you have a password, you want to make sure the name does not exceed, I don't know, 15 characters. Password must not exceed 8 characters or must be between 8 and 11. You see a lot of combinations coming. These are all coming in. So we have to do all these validations. So how do you find what is the length that we have, right? So it's easy. You can, and I know those return data types. So for me, it's a little bit easier, but let's say if you wanted to use some built-in methods, you'll say int length equals to, let's say, a greeting message or something, or password. So we'll say string, this is our password, string password equals to test 1 2 3 4, right? And then what you can do is password, and you can, as soon as you use the string and you have options to all of the thing you can do with string, right? So you might be asking, well, Mohammed, you didn't create string object. You didn't say string equals to new string. Well, string was kind of a special type of object that was built where you don't have to create an object. You can directly access them. We'll talk about that, why is that way. But for now, string is one of those types that doesn't have to be created as an object. You can directly access its functionality. So soon as the Java understands that the password value is a string, it will give you all the options that you can do with string. Make sense? So this is what I want you to do. I want you to find the length, right? So, and you see how length, and on the right side, it tells you int. So that's how I know that length is an int data type. Make sense? And that's how I defined it here, int. Now, if I mention this as a string, it's mismatching, right? You're just putting something that doesn't fit there, right? So make sure those things are very important. And you see how much attention to details you have to be, like when you are working with this kind of stuff, right? So you get used to it. And then we do length. And if we do a print now, we'll get the length, right? So let's comment this piece out. And then if we print this out, what is the length I'm expecting? 8 characters, right? You get an 8 character. So any questions so far? Okay. Next is, okay, I have a bunch of those and I'm going to copy them and we'll go over each one. We're tired of typing this stuff up. So okay, so the next one, we may have a message, let's say a string on a web page that has unnecessary space in the beginning of the string and unnecessary space in the end of the string, right? We can use a built-in method called trim, right? You see how it's a greeting.trim? Trim will do is it will remove the unnecessary spaces from before and after, okay? Again, these are not the condition you're gonna run into tomorrow, but I'm just kind of teaching you. We have like 100 of those things you can use with string, just to kind of get you into a space where if you have to manipulate string, go into the library, see what they have, and we're gonna walk through a library a little bit and go from there. And then let's say you have a message here, and within the message you have double quote. Do you see that? So if we get rid of these, because now compiler is getting confused, because we said if it's double quote opening, double quote closing, that means everything in between is a string. So now it doesn't understand anything. It's saying, okay, you open a double quote here, and you closed it here, so I understand this is a string, but what is this thing? But a lot of time you may have a text where you have a quote in between, right? So to ignore that, you just do a backslash front of each of those code. So now compiler is saying, oh, I understand this is part of that string. I'm going to ignore that, right? So that's one way to cover your
It's
string.
going to read as it is, or
It will print with the quotations, right? Because we don't want to remove the quotation
yeah,
because this is part of the
you're confused like that.
yeah. Because when you don't put the backslash,
Yeah.
it doesn't understand where to end, when to start.
Which one they
Right. Right. So you have to explicitly. So coding, you have to kind of give every single direction, right? And then you have, let's say you have your full name, but you want to convert them into completely lowercase, all lowercase. So you can use built-in method called full name dot to lowercase. It will convert your entire full name into lowercase. Vice versa, if you wanted to convert all of the name to an uppercase. So let's say you're doing some computation or you're trying to save this data into a database and you're taking all the data from the user, right? You don't care how they're giving you uppercase, lowercase. You can actually clean it up for them, right? You can trim it first, and then you can convert it to lowercase if you want. You can convert it to uppercase if you want, all of that stuff.
We can also, there's another, some customer put uppercase, some customer put.
Yeah, but maybe, yeah, if your requirements say they all need to be lowercase, that function, that method will pretty much do the job for you. It will convert it to completely lowercase. And then you have, this is a very common one, right? You want to find out, let me comment all of that out. And then, and you don't always have to like, if something that returns a value, so like in this case, we can just print this out, but in our, for sake of example, we can say boolean is contains password. We want to find out if password variable contains the word password, right? We want to make sure the user should not be using the word password within their password. Does that make sense? So we can easily find that out by just saying if password dot contains, and you see how the return type is what? Boolean. That's why I decided this to be Boolean. And is expecting a string character sequence. Like which word are you looking for that should be or should not be part of this your actual string here, right? So we want to make sure this password variable value does it have password or not? That's bottom line is that. So and then we'll say contains password, right? And now we can get rid of this. And then we can just print and find out. So let's take a moment. Raise your hand. If I run this code, what do I expect to see? Malik? Are you Malik?
Yeah.
What can I expect to see?
I can't see, I'm blind. My I left the glasses at home.
You gotta sit in the front, alright?
I just put on the glasses.
Okay. Do you have any extra glasses? Because he had extra laptop for her, so. What can I expect to see? Does it contain? No, right? So we expect to. It's false. Awesome. Right? Let's check this out. If this works. In theory, we should get true, right? true. So you can write a logic based of that. If it contains password, throw an error. Hey, you can have a password within your password, like password string within your password. We can also say, we can also compare username. Your username should not be part of your password. Or also we can compare your length must be greater than 8 characters and less than 13 characters. Oh, wait a minute. Your password must also have a numeric value, at least one. So this is so much we can do. So string manipulation is very important. And then finally, I'll do,
We do password test 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay?
yeah,
Why it's true?
because we are looking for, does the password contains the word test? We have part of your password has a test in it. So that means it's true. Password contains the word test, right? And we're not writing any logics yet. We're just trying to find out the first step. Does it contain test or not? In this case, it does. You can also figure out if the string, and we'll unhook the full name. Okay, it needs to unhook the first name, last name. And you want to find out, is your name empty or not? Right? Like let's say if someone's trying to submit a form without an empty text field, you can check that and validate that. If the field is empty, give them an error message and go from there. All right. So for homework, we have a lot of homework, and let's go over those. Where did I put it? So I want you to again kind of reiterate what the primitive stuff that we did in classwork, right? Go back again, find out the distance between Earth and Moon, what type of variable are you going to use, number of keys on a piano, right? Find out how many keys there are on a piano, so see which type of data you can use. Average age of you and your siblings, so find out the average age. If you don't have siblings, use your parents or something. Is your gender male, right? So if I give me a true or false, United States depth value, right? Minimum age to purchase alcohol in the U.S., right? So it's just a random stuff. If someone had to build an application with that, it would be very weird. So that's that. I want you to. This is the first part of your homework, and let's go over the second part now. And for the second part, you have to start learning how to read Java documentations. And again, like if you are not getting all of it right, it's totally fine. Like from the past experience with students, if Java is your right? So this is your string that you want to work with. I'm saying string, my statement, I'm a good programmer, right? That's your string. Create that string, and that's kind of what we're going to be working with, just like how we had the full name, right? And then you can kind of manipulate the full name and figure a lot of stuff out. First thing first, I want you to find the length of this statement, right? Convert all values to lowercase. Find out if a statement contains Muhammad, right? Find the fifth index of the statement. We didn't go over that. How would you find that? I'm going to show you that, right? Find if the statement is empty. Compare my statement with the string called Technosoft, right? Check if message starts with welcome. Check if message ends with goodbye. Does that make sense? But we didn't go over some of them, right? So you learn how to use some of them in class, but how would you do that? Because there's like 100 of those, and we don't need to know all of those, but the most common one, you can do that. So let's look for the documentation. So every time someone generates a library and it's published, just like Selenium, just like String, they're obligated to create a Java doc for that, right? And so far, this is kind of the documentation, and it's not great, but this is what we can work with, right? And you see how all of this stuff is here, and it kind of gives you a description of what's going on. So let's say we use contains, right? You can go to contains. It says return true if and only if this string contains the specific sequence of character values, right? As the sequence to search for, true if the string contains a false, otherwise. So there's a bunch of throws, returns, since, and parameter. You can ignore that. Just kind of read description and see. Get used to learning how to read engineering documentations. Even if you don't understand few things, that's okay. You can, for those answers, try not to Google right away, because Google will give you some answers, right? Try to see if you can read the documentation and solve it, right? Because most of the time in real world, you have to read documentation. There's not going to be video for you on Udemy. There's not going to be a solution for you anywhere, right? You have to solve it. So only help is the user guide that you get from that specific language, right? So I'm going to share this with you. And that's that. And that can be part of the homework right here. Any questions on this homework? Any questions from online about the homework? Saturday is a must now, right? If you're struggling, so if you don't get it started tomorrow, Saturday doesn't add a lot of value, or tonight, right? So make sure, and believe me, let me reach home and I'll send you videos, all right? I have to go home first and then send you the video. So, let's be. All right. Any questions from online? Raise your hand if you have any question. Go ahead, Nirmal.
Just a question. So, let's say if you're defining a long number that's like a US population 387 million. So, is there a way we can use like 387 then put like L or like
Yeah.
like how?
Yeah, you can use L at the end, but I think like the newer like version 8, it might not require it, but it's a good practice to use L, just because, guys, we're still in class, right? So let's just give it a second. So we still you can still use L, but for now just keep using L if you're going to use long.
So like how would I type 387 million? So like 387 and
Yeah,
just
you
put
just
L.
whatever that value is, 387,000,000, and then put L, right? But I think million stays within long, integer as well. When you want to do US dat, you may have to use long for that, which is a trillion, right?
Fine.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions from online? Okay. All right. Since no one else have a question, Deepak, everything's good. I'm going to let me share this before I forget. Copy. No. No, I'm just giving you here. Oh, that's a good question. How are you going to share the homework, right? Um, I want you to zip. Does everyone know how to zip the file? Right? You'll zip the file, create some sort of a Google area for yourself in your accounts, right? Like called homework, and just share the link with Deepak and Ahsan, right? And Ahsan is the person you guys meet him, right? So you can send it to both, and they can divide. Whoever's checking it, you can figure that out, right? Usually they're checking the homework, so that's that. Um, Homework is very important. So if you don't do any homework, and 2 months later you come and say, hey, I'm doing horrible in class, we're gonna go back to homework. Did you do homework? Did you do classwork? How'd you do in quiz, right? So just I want to prep you for that. We're just like Google. We track everything.
You have to share on Slack or
Yeah.
on email.
No, not Slack. Email. You zip the file. You upload it in your Google Doc,
Okay.
and you share the link.
Can you give us their email?
I think. Can you share your email on Slack? Okay, we'll share. All
So we
right.
just zip the file.
Yes. Upload it. Copy the share link. I'm sure you guys can figure that part out. No, the entire project file, right? So the way you do it, I'll show you guys. Let's not have any confusion. And last thing I want you to say, oh, I didn't do it because I didn't know how to send it. Channel. Okay, so this is pretty much your homework. This is what I want you to do. Find out where your project is. The way you find out, you see where it says Documents, Workspace, Java Demo? Okay? So this is what you're going to do. You go to Documents, you look for Workspace, you look for Java Demo. That's your project. You right click this, you compress it. Right? As soon as you compress it, it makes shippable. That's how you have to see it, right? And then you go into your email. Let me see.
Are you recording yet?
Yes, this is recording. Okay, now that I'm recording, okay, it's just only after break sometime. Brain gives up. So let's say this is my email, right? And you can go into, so you're gonna have something like that, right? Okay. And then upload. You see this Java demo. So maybe create a folder, be organized, and then just dump it here, right? And it's going to upload it for you, right? Here internet is very slow, but let's say if you were to find out where this thing is now. Anyhow, right here, right? So you right click, use to share, and you use Deepak's email, right? So Deepak Sharma, right? And then you send it to him. Do you want to do it? And that's it. Any questions on uploading it? So this is how you're going to do it. So
Where you send
his email address, he's going to send it, right? Him and Ahsan's. But we're good. All right, it's 9:50, and we're done for today. I'll see you all on Tuesday. All right.